MacVoices live at the Silicon Valley Macintosh Users Group. This is MacVoices. Today's MacVoices is supported by MacVoices After Dark. Uncensored, off-topic, and always off the wall. MacVoices After Dark is available as a benefit to our Patreon subscribers. Sign up at patreon.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, a couple notes on this particular program. This was a live recording of a presentation done for the Silicon Valley Mac User Group with Jeff Gamet and Jim Rea. Because we were using their system to record and not the one I usually use, things are going to look a little different and sound a little different, but I still think you will enjoy it. We did break the presentation down into two parts, so it's a little easier for you to enjoy. So let's get right to it with the Silicon Valley Mac User Group. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this is a special MacVoices Live. We are presenting to the Silicon Valley Mac User Group. Silicon Valley, thank you so much for having us. It's great to see you all. I know that the folks on the recording probably won't see you, but maybe they'll hear you occasionally. And I brought along a couple friends to help out today. First off, Mr. Jeff Gamet is here. Jeff, welcome. Good to see you.
Chuck, it's always great to see you. And this is actually pretty cool, getting to have a live audience that's an actual user group. And also Silicon Valley Mac User Group is pretty awesome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Also with us is Mr. Jim Rea, the developer in this little panel. Jim, welcome. It's good to have you.
I think this is actually not my first time at the Silicon Valley Group. I think I presented to them in person back in the early 90s.
Wow.
Back when you were just a kid.
Back when all of us were just kids, right?
I didn't know they had presenters that as 3-year-olds, Jim. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, the SV Mug has asked us to talk a little bit about the WWDC announcements. And of course, we've done this now, I think, for 2 different panels on MacVoices Live. There's no shortage of commentary out there. So trying to put maybe a little bit different spin on it, because we certainly are not going to go back and review everything. That would just be a complete waste of everyone's time. But what I thought we might start off with is what, if you had to pick one, what is the most important announcement Apple made at WWDC this time around? And you can be as specific or as general as you like. And Jim, I'm going to start with you since you're the developer in the group, because this was, after all, the developers conference.
And this is weird because I can't see myself. But at the risk of repeating myself, I think the biggest thing to me was not an announcement per se, but just how prominent the Macintosh was all week long. If you go back, say 5 years ago, the Mac was practically invisible at WWDC. It was almost never mentioned, and everything they came out with was just for iOS and iPad. At this year's, the Mac was everywhere. Almost every announcement of a new feature was, this is available on iOS, iPad, and Macintosh. They kept saying that over and over again. One of the most prominent new things was shortcuts for Mac. So, definitely a Mac feature. And, so as a Mac developer, because that's what I am, I'm just so happy to see so much attention put on the Mac, and where 5 years ago a lot of us were wondering, like, well, what is the future of the Mac? Is it Apple even going to keep it? And now that's all turned around, and obviously the future of the Mac looks very bright.
Good. I love that perspective, because I think it's so easy to sort of overlook that and get bogged down in individual announcements. And I love that sort of 30,000-foot view and pointing out that the Mac is back and it looks like it's here to stay.
just a slight follow up too was, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 years ago when, I guess when they first announced Catalyst. So I think it was 3 years ago because they weren't shipping it, but they announced it. And they had this big, are we merging the Mac and iOS? And they had this slide. No. You guys remember that? And it's really kind of weird because that seems like that's exactly where they're headed. Like that slide was completely, not what happened, but it seems, at the time, I think they were trying to head off people worrying that the Mac was going to go away by becoming, iOS or something. But it really seems like they pulled both, like especially iPad OS has become a lot more like Mac OS, and Mac's gotten some things, so they are kind of bringing them together, but in a way that really enhances both of them. So not subsuming the Mac being subsumed by iOS, keeping both going, the best parts of each platform, but definitely the Mac is continuing to be the Mac and move forward, and exciting things are happening.
I definitely want to come back to that point, Jim. So don't let me forget it. But I want to get to Jeff and find out. Jeff, you want to pick something specific, or are you going to go general? What do you think was the most influential or important thing Apple did at WWDC this year?
I'm going a little bit more general, and I'm actually building off of what Jim was saying. And I think the big announcement this year was unification. And by that I mean taking all of these different elements that we have on different platforms. So we have Mac as a platform, iPad as a platform, and an iPhone as a platform, and bringing them together in a way where they work more seamlessly as unique platforms, but also as a shared platform, if that makes sense at all. And seeing this tighter integration between the devices that Apple offers and the operating systems, that to me was a really big thing. And I think it's Apple tipping their hand, so to speak, about where they're headed. And so to hop to what Jim said about the big slide coming down, no, we are not having a single operating system. I think that remains true and will continue to remain true. But what we will see, which Jim already said, so I'm totally backing you up on this one, we're seeing the best features that are appropriate to move to the other devices happening. And I think that's good, because if there's something that works really well on the Mac and can work equally well on, say, an iPad, why not let that happen? And at the same time, keeping in mind as developers that these are different devices. You have different ways of interacting with the user interface, and even very fundamental things like how do you interact with documents on these devices. So I don't see this becoming a single operating system across all devices, but this nice tighter integration across all of the platforms to make it easier to jump to the device that's appropriate for the task that you need to perform at this moment.
Okay, those are a couple really great answers. I want to try to mash them up a little bit. Jeff, to follow up on your comment, though, I wish I could quote you exactly how you just said it, but the device that's most appropriate for the task, I think, is sort of what you said.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I find the whole debate over, iOS, iPad, iPhone, just kind of pointless. Because if there's a tool that is best suited to the task, then that's the one you want to choose. If it's a task that can be done maybe not necessarily equally well, but maybe just in different ways on different devices, then do that. And if you have to do a task on a device that is not the optimal device for that, then make it as good as you can.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that seems to be something that gets lost in all these debates of iOS versus Mac OS, and iPad versus iPhone, and Mac versus iPad, and all that.
Well, we do have this almost ironic platform battle happening with, and I'm using the term battle loosely, because there are people that say the Mac is the only platform you can use for a specific task. Let's use movie editing as an example. The Mac is the only platform that you can use for movie editing. Well, for some people, yes. For other people, like me, LumaFusion is actually the better place for me to do that video editing. So I do it on an iPad Pro. And so we're seeing this kind of platform battle happening with Apple users about iPad versus iPhone versus Mac. And it wasn't that long ago when that battle was Mac versus Windows. So I suppose in that sense, if Apple's going to have a platform battle, it might as well be internal because whoever wins, ultimately Apple wins.
Before the meeting started, we were having a little informal discussion about Microsoft Office and the pros and cons of that, and Google's Office suite and the pros and cons of that. So, taking the fight internal between the devices, that's a really interesting point that the other platforms don't seem to have. And I kind of think it's a nice problem to have because it means that people are passionate about each of those respective platforms within the Apple ecosystem.
Well, at some point a few years ago, at this point, many years ago, it was probably Steve Jobs, but it might have been someone else inside Apple, said that if you're going to have platform cannibalization, the best way to have it is internally. So if you're going to cannibalize the Mac, you might as well do it with the iPad or the iPhone.
Jim, as a Mac developer, is there a particular reason that you have not decided to move over into iOS development? Or is it because you think the Mac is the best platform for the kind of programming that you do and the kind of application that you publish?
For one thing, it's one reason is because I have a small organization, and resources are limited, and you can only do so many things. And definitely in the past, and still to a large extent, that you can't take most of your investment in programming for one platform and move it to the other. Now, Apple's been making it so that you can take your investment in iOS software and use it to move to the Mac, but that doesn't really work the other way. You can't take software written for AppKit, which is the framework for the Mac, and move it to iOS. And I don't think that's probably going to happen per se. I think that, like the platforms are different in that one of them's touch first, the other is indirect pointer first. And also on the iOS side, it's basically mostly full screen, one thing at a time. They've addressed that a little bit, where the Mac is windowed, and it's really, basically on iOS, things are set up, they're more siloed, and every app has its own sandbox. So it's very difficult for apps to talk to each other and create a workflow where you're moving from one thing, one app to another. So, and part of that is just an artificial thing that Apple has set up and continues to work that way. So, I don't see it in terms of like what the Mac is good at is when you need to use multiple apps to achieve a task and not just one. So if you can, like LumaFusion, good example, because you when you're working in LumaFusion, you're just working in LumaFusion.
Mm-hmm.
But if you need to go, share between a bunch of apps, the Mac really facilitates that, and iOS still doesn't. Um, so
Okay, so one of the solutions, I, I believe, and I think our co-panelist Brittany Smith is a big advocate of this, is shortcuts on iOS. And she is a shortcuts wizard, and she has, I mean, I think on the last show she mentioned she had a shortcut that has 400 steps, 400 components. So there's something to be said for the ability to maybe build many applications like that that will help move data and information between apps. But that
yeah, but
begs the question, should you have to?
fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with that. And now they've got that on both apps. But for example, the iOS, it has no universal file system. You can't put a file in a place, and make it easy for one app to work on it and then another one. They have built the Files app, but still a lot of shortcomings to that. And each app stores documents in a sandbox where they're isolated from each other. Right now, I'm on my Mac and just looking at my screen, I've got 1, 2, 3, 5 apps that I can see right now, and that's kind of low because I've got my WebEx screen enlarged. But I can arrange things, so I'm like, oh yeah, that app's over there, and I can just click, then I'm there, and then I'm there. I can arrange 4 windows, an arrangement that I can click between different apps and just do, and I can see all of them and easily work back and forth. You just can't do that on iOS yet. Now, I love my iPad and my iPhone. I use it all the time, but not for that kind of thing. And actually, probably my biggest disappointment for WWDC this year is I was hoping that they would come up with a way to run macOS on iPad Pros. Obviously the new iPad Pros have the same processor, same memory, same storage as all the latest Macintoshes. They're the same computer, except the iPad has touch, and the Macs don't. So there's clearly no technical reason why Mac software could not run on an M1 iPad. Not necessarily booting into it, but I'm thinking like a virtual machine, like sort of like Parallels, and being able to run Mac software on the iPad that way. So why should I have to choose? If I buy a $2,500 machine, if I need to run Mac software every now and then, I should be able to do that on my $2,500 machine. And I think it's going to happen. So it didn't happen this year. Maybe it'll happen next year. But it's just like, it's the obvious elephant in the room. I've been seeing more and more, pundits and whatever opine on that idea. So too bad it didn't happen this year. Maybe they're just not quite ready. Apple likes to get everything lined up, and but I think it'll happen. Maybe it'll happen next year. But
Jim, I don't think it's happening next year. I think that's several years off if it happens. This is one of those places where we all can absolutely agree. It would be absolutely awesome because there's, as you said, there's no reason hardware-wise where an iPad with an M1 processor can't run a Mac app. So why not let it happen? And I think this is one of those places where Apple is going to keep an artificial distinction for quite a while to keep those platforms clearly distinct. If you want to run Mac apps, well, that means you have to get a Mac. But that can also run iPad apps because it's a Mac. But if you get an iPad, well, that's an iPad. That means you're running iOS apps, and I don't see that distinction changing.
It could be, but I think that's purely a business decision. It's not a technical decision.
Oh, totally.
My guess is that it's already they have prototypes, running inside the spaceship right now. And
totally.
It's just a question of if they're gonna, and I just think it's something irresistible that. There's got to be a lot of people in Apple that want it. And, I'm not predicting that it's next year, But I don't think it's going to be 5 years away because it's just too artificial. And it's going to become more so as the iPads become even more powerful. And they're going to have a hard time selling $2,500 iPads that don't run. And who would have predicted that Macs would run iPhone software? You know, nobody predicted that. And I think everybody would have said, oh, Apple will never, ever, ever in a million years do that. And they did it last year.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that's always like Apple's like, we'll never do this. You know, nobody wants to have movies on their iPod. Oh, here's movies on your iPod. You know, nobody wants to have a cursor device on your iPad. They didn't even save that for WWDC. So, you know, until they do it, they're always like, no, 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 that's a terrible idea. I think this is an irresistible idea that will absolutely happen. You know, we'll probably be surprised, including me, but, you know, I'll be shocked if, you know, 3 years from now it hasn't happened.
And I struggle with this idea a little bit. I first of all, I agree with you and Jeff both that technically there's no reason. And almost certainly there are prototypes running inside the spaceship. No question about
Hey,
it.
Chuck, I'm going to expand on that for you. There's
Please.
no way that Apple has not had Intel, or excuse me, not Intel, but earlier A series iPads running Mac OS.
Yes. I agree. I agree. Okay, but and this was just asked to me privately in a private message in our chat room. But why would we want that? And that's kind of where I stand on this. I just got a new iPad. I just got the Magic Keyboard for it. It's very nice, no question about it. It's got the trackpad, it's got the keys, it's great. But if it were running Mac OS, then I would kind of look at it and say, oh, you know, what's the difference between this and the MacBook Air that I have? Both of them are running M1 chips. Obviously, the differences between Mac OS and iOS, we all know what those are. But and that's something I want to come back to as well. But I look at it and say, okay, and that's a case where I really wouldn't need both machines. But I feel like that unless you were going to create a dual boot machine, I feel like I would not be having the best experience. I would be forced into one platform or the other, and that just doesn't resonate with me, I'm afraid. And the dual boot machine, because Mac OS right now, as far as I know, and Jim, maybe you can speak to this better than I can. Does it have touch controls in it, so that or would they be overlaid with basically the mouse pointer kind of thing?
I'm not imagining, although I would guess that they do have, iPads that boot into Mac OS at Apple, but I don't think they will release that. I think about how parallels work. You have a Mac, and then you click on an icon, and suddenly you can run Windows apps. But it's still a Mac, and you've got Mac apps running. But you click on parallels, and now now you've got a Windows window, and you run Windows apps inside of that, right? And that's what I'm imagining. So think about it right now. If you could take your two machines, right? So, and first of all, how many people do you think have two machines like that? Most people can't afford to buy an M1 iPad and an M1, MacBook Air, although Apple would love that. But most people can't do that. Most people can only buy one. So right now they have to pick. Apple's making them pick. And when I'm saying, this would let more people buy the higher end iPads. And yeah, they probably, most of those people probably wouldn't also buy a MacBook Air, but they might buy an iMac or, some other Mac. But anyway, you take your iPad, you've got your Mac sitting there, and you can run like a screen share program, like RemoteX is the one I use, but there's tons of them that do VNC screen sharing, right? You take a screen share, you take screen sharing, VNC program, and you can, hook your iPad into your Mac, and you can run your Mac from your iPad. And it's going to be kind of hard if you don't have a trackpad or a mouse hooked to your iPad. But you can do that, and people do that now. Like they'll, maybe they need to remotely, do something. But so what I'm envisioning is that same sort of experience where you could run a Mac inside one iPad app, and then when you're done and you want to get back to the normal things you do with an iPad, you just flick at the bottom, and you're back to being an iPad, and not dual booting. So I don't think they'd want to boot into it, because then you've got all kinds of problems about the sandbox, and the Mac can run stuff that's not in the App Store and stuff like that. But if they just have all that in one sandbox app, so you don't have to worry that the Mac software is going to escape and do bad things on the cell network. That's another reason, like, you can't buy a Mac with 5G. So I'd like, a lot of people would like to have a Mac with cellular connection. That would be a way to do it.
That wraps up the first part of our visit to the Silicon Valley Macintosh user group with Jeff Gamet and Jim Rea. We'll be back with part 2 and the final part next time on Mac Voices. Until then, and as always, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.